Imagine walking into one of the fanciest and most beautiful palaces in the world. There are golden hallways, sparkling chandeliers, and more silk and satin than you could ever count. But take a big breath in, and suddenly, yuck, there's a horrible smell that could make fresh flowers die from far away. Welcome to the Grand Palace of Versailles in the 1600s. It looked amazing, but it was also dirty and smelly. It was a mix of beauty and grossness. Rich women wore shiny jewelry and fancy dresses, but when it came to staying clean, life was pretty awful. Today, we're going to take a closer look, don't worry, just with words, at how royal women lived in really unhygienic and unhealthy ways during the most powerful time of the French kingdom. Get ready, because it's pretty shocking. These are the 5 worst hygiene habits royal women had, and you won't believe some of them. Let's start with the first one. Bathing, or rather, not bathing. If you were a noble lady back then, everyone expected you to walk gracefully, be charming, and wear beautiful clothes. But when it came to staying clean, things went badly. Washing your body like we do today was almost never done. People believed that taking a full bath could make you sick. The doctors of that time thought warm water opened up the pores in your skin, letting bad stuff from the air get inside you. The church didn't help either. Many religious leaders said that bathing too much was proud or sinful. So people slowly stopped bathing altogether. Most women, yes, even royal ones, didn't have private bathrooms or even regular ways to wash up. They almost never took full body baths. Instead, they used small cloths to wipe their hands, faces, and sometimes necks. But those cloths weren't dipped in water. Nope, they were often dampened with alcohol, vinegar, or even spit. People thought that was safer than using water. And when it actually was time for a bath, that was a rare event and not very nice. Usually, the whole family shared one tub. They would take turns using the same water. And guess who got to go first? The men. By the time a woman got in, the water was dirty, cloudy, full of soap bits and body grime, and probably barely warm. Sometimes the water was already gone by the time it was a woman's turn. Now imagine what that meant for the palace. The place was so stinky, the smell didn't just stay near the stables. Visitors used to complain about the terrible scent inside the halls of Versailles. It smelled like old perfume, body odor, animal fat, and mold. But the strange thing is, these royal people really did care how they looked. They wore perfect makeup, amazing gowns, and tons of expensive jewelry. But underneath all that, their skin often hadn't touched soap in months. They looked good from far away, but probably didn't smell good up close. It's like they were told to be perfect from the outside, while ignoring what was happening underneath the clothes and powder. And if you think that was bad, wait until you hear about the second horrible hygiene habit royal women had at the palace. Now let's talk about something even worse: toilets. Or, more honestly, the lack of them. The Palace of Versailles was one of the most beautiful and expensive buildings in the world. It had fancy rooms, golden walls, and amazing decorations. But guess what it didn't really have? Proper bathrooms. That's right. Hundreds of rooms, thousands of visitors, but almost no real toilets. So what did people do when nature called? They used chamber pots, mold bowls, or buckets. These were kept under beds, behind curtains, or hidden inside closets. When someone had to go, they would use the pot, and then get ready for this. Someone would toss it out the window. Now imagine, if someone was walking outside below that window, splat. Yep, a very gross and unfortunate surprise. And it wasn't just rare accidents. It happened all the time. Even worse, some men didn't use the pots at all. They would just pee off balconies or right in the gardens. Yes, rich, royal gardens were often used as giant outdoor bathrooms by lazy courtiers. People visiting from other countries were shocked at how dirty it was. But this wasn't just a few people being rude. This kind of behavior was happening every day. Versailles got a very bad reputation for being super stinky. It was so bad that the long hallways of the palace were used like toilets. Imagine being a lady walking slowly through a beautiful hallway in a big, fancy dress. But you weren't just trying to look graceful. You also had to lift your skirts carefully to avoid stepping in poop or pee. That's disgusting, but true. By the year 1715, things had gotten so out of control that a royal order was given. The palace floors had to be cleaned once a week. Not every day once a week. And that was actually seen as a big improvement. Now let's talk about something even more personal wiping. Back then, toilet paper didn't exist. Nope. People used scraps of cloth, leaves, straw, or even their hands to clean themselves. And they usually didn't wash their hands afterward. So gross, right? With poor ways to clean up and worse ways to get rid of waste, it's no wonder bugs, sickness, and bad smells spread like crazy. And if you thought bad bathrooms were the worst, guess again. Things really got wild when it came to hair and wigs. At Versailles, fancy clothes were important, but hairstyles were everything. Women didn't just style their hair. They turned it into giant works of art. They made their hair stand super tall, decorated it with ribbons, feathers, pearls, and even tiny gardens or ships. Yes, actual mini ships sitting on top of their heads, floating in the curls. It was like having a whole adventure scene on your scalp. But how did they make their hair stand so high? Women used metal wires, animal hair, wool, or cotton to stuff their styles and make big shapes. After that, they rubbed in thick pomade, which was made from animal fat, usually beef fat, to hold it in place. Sounds gross? It was. That greasy hair cream made the perfect home for lice, those tiny bugs that crawl and live in hair. Because women didn't to wash their real hair often, and didn't to take off their huge wigs, lice parties were happening all the time in those hairstyles. It wasn't strange, it was expected. To deal with the itchiness, rich ladies had special tools called lice claws. These were small, long-handled combs made of silver. They would scratch their heads during dinner parties without ruining their hair. Some women even brought their lice claws to social events and used them while sipping drinks, acting like nothing was wrong. Even with all that discomfort, women refused to stop because their looks were tied to their status. If you looked messy or your hairstyle was too simple, people thought you were less important. So no matter how itchy, smelly, or painful their hair was, these women kept their giant wigs on. Poorer women didn't deal with this nonsense. They often just shaved their heads to avoid lice. But noble women? Their hair was their crown, even if it hid a whole bug zoo underneath. And if you're feeling grossed out now, just wait till you hear what was going on in the royal kitchens. Let us keep going. Next up is something that should have been a happy part of palace life, the food. After all, royal banquets were famous. The tables were full of meat pies, pastries, roasted birds, and sweet fruits. But hidden behind all that delicious-looking food was a really yucky and dangerous truth. You see, the royal kitchens at the Palace of Versailles had many of the same dirty problems as the rest of the palace. The building's old plumbing was so bad that sometimes sewage, yes, actual poop water, would come back up through the pipes and end up in the kitchens. In fact, it's believed that one time, sewage spilled into Queen Marie Antoinette's private kitchen. The problem was, they didn't have modern tools like we do today. There were no fridges to keep meat cold, no air fans or vents, and no good way to get rid of trash. So what do you think happened to all that food? Meat went bad fast, fruits and veggies sat out for days. Bugs and mice ran around freely. And yet, the royal cooks had to keep cooking and keep serving these fancy meals. The people eating these dishes were the most important and powerful people in France. As you can guess, people kept getting sick. Upset stomachs, vomiting, diarrhea, these were regular problems. But that wasn't the worst of it. The really scary thing was parasites. Because meat wasn't always cooked properly, lots of people at court ended up with intestinal worms, especially tapeworms. These are long, disgusting bugs that live inside your stomach and feed off what you eat. Even King Louis XIV, the most powerful man in France, had problems. He is said to have passed a 6-inch long tapeworm. That's as long as a pencil. It was a gross reminder that no matter how rich or royal you were, dirty food could still make you very sick. Now think about the noble women at court. They were expected to eat politely and perfectly. During meals, they had to look elegant, talk with others, raise glasses, and smile even if their stomachs were cramping or they felt like throwing up. Some women were dealing with serious illnesses from bad food, but still had to sit at dinner, acting happy and healthy. That's the kind of pressure they were under to always look perfect, no matter what was happening inside their bodies. And speaking of pressure, nothing was more stressful, scary, and painful for a royal woman than giving birth. Back then, having a baby wasn't just a private moment shared with a few people. Nope, it was a huge public event. Whenever a queen or noblewoman was going to have a baby, it became everyone's business. The birthroom would fill up with all kinds of people: doctors, priests, noble guests, members of the court, even people who had no reason to be there. And they weren't there to help. They were there to watch. It's true. Births had to be done in public to prove the baby was really from the royal mother. People were afraid that if the baby was stillborn or a girl, someone might secretly swap it for a healthy baby boy. So they forced the mother to give birth in front of a huge crowd to make sure nothing dishonest could happen. One famous example is when Queen Marie Therese gave birth. The room was so full of people that it felt more like a theater show than a place for a lady in labor. Can you imagine trying to give birth, in pain and afraid, with tons of people staring at you? Queen Marie Antoinette fainted during one of her births because the room was so hot, crowded, and overwhelming. She wasn't the only one. Many women passed out, cried, or had serious medical problems during childbirth, all while being watched like they were in a play. On top of all that, healthcare back then was terrible. Doctors didn't know much about how to treat infections. There were no antibiotics, and most people didn't even wash their hands before helping with the delivery. The tools they used weren't clean either. Because of this, giving birth was very dangerous. About 1 out of every 3 kids died before they even turned 3 years old. And many mothers died too, often from infections that could have been avoided if doctors had known how to keep things clean. So while everyone celebrated royal births with music and parties, there were also moments of pain, fear, and danger, especially for the mothers. Now you've seen 4 out of the 5 gross and painful truths about life in the palace. Ready for the last one? You want to believe how much royal women had to suffer just to keep up their perfect royal image. Let us talk about the final and maybe the most private and painful part of a royal woman's life: childbirth. But in the 1600s and 1700s, giving birth wasn't just a family event. It was seen as a public show. If you were a queen or a high-ranking noblewoman in France, giving birth wasn't just about having a baby. It was about the future of the country. People were so worried about someone switching a baby, for example, trading a stillborn or a girl baby for a healthy baby boy, that they decided every birth had to be witnessed. Yes, you read that right. Royal mothers had to give birth in front of an audience to make sure everything was honest. The room would fill up with all kinds of people: doctors, priests, royal family members, noblemen, and guests. And guess what? Most of them were just there to watch, not to help. When Queen Marie Therese gave birth, the room was so packed that it looked more like a stage for a play than a special, quiet place to have a baby. The poor queen had to go through the pain of childbirth with so many eyes staring at her. There was no privacy at all, and she couldn't even cry or scream freely because people were watching. Later, Queen Marie Antoinette fainted after delivering a baby. The room was too hot, too crowded, and she was exhausted from everything. And she wasn't the only one. Many royal women passed out, cried, or had serious health problems, while everyone just stood around them. And remember, this was a time when doctors didn't know much about keeping things clean. They didn't use antibiotics, and they often didn't wash their hands or clean the tools they used during births. That meant infections were very common, and even a small cut could lead to something deadly. Because of these bad conditions, having a baby was extremely risky. About 1 in 3 children died before they turned 3. Mothers also often died not from the birth itself, but from the infections that came after. So even though royal births were supposed to be happy and celebrated across the country, for the mothers, they were often scary, painful, and dangerous. The pressure to have healthy male babies, the fear of being watched, and the huge risk to their health made giving birth a terrifying experience. So now you've heard the 5 most disgusting and shocking truths from life inside the beautiful but filthy halls of Versailles. Behind the glittering dresses, the fancy perfume, and the jeweled crowns, royal women were dealing with things that might make you wrinkle your nose. They lived in a world where they couldn't bathe, didn't have proper toilets, scratched their heads full of lice at dinner, risked eating spoiled food, and gave birth under a spotlight of staring eyes. They looked elegant and perfect on the outside, but on the inside, they were sore, itchy, sick, and deeply stressed. If you thought royal life was all about dancing, parties, and ball gowns, think again. The real story is a lot messier and a lot more human. Thanks for joining this journey back in time. And remember, history isn't just fascinating sometimes, it's downright gross.